A one-night stand with the Italian mafia boss made him to become obsessed over her. Beatrice Parker stood in the middle of a crowded New York City club, the bass vibrating through the soles of her boots. She didn't want to be here. Her friends had practically dragged her out, insisting she needed to live a little after her last breakup. She adjusted the strap of her black dress, scanning the room for an escape route. The air smelled like expensive cologne and cheap vodka. Then she saw him. He was leaning against the far wall, separate from the chaos. A man who looked like he could break someone in half with his bare hands. Muscular build, dark hair, tattoos creeping up his neck and down his arms. He wasn't drinking. He was watching. Specifically, he was watching her. Beatrice didn't look away. She held his gaze, challenging it. He pushed off the wall and moved toward her, the crowd parting instinctively. He didn't say hello. He just stopped in front of her, his presence overwhelming. "You look like you hate this place," he said, his voice low and rough. "I do," Beatrice replied. He smiled, a dangerous, sharp thing. "Good. Let's go somewhere else." She knew she shouldn't. She knew nothing about him. But for the first time all night, she felt awake. She took his hand. "Where are you watching this story from? If you enjoy dark romance with a possessive twist, hit subscribe and let's get into it." The silence in the penthouse was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of New York City traffic. Beatrice sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, pulling her dress back on. The fabric felt rough against her skin, a stark contrast to the heat of Bernardo's hands just moments ago. She didn't look at him. She focused on the buckle of her sandal, her fingers steady despite the chaos in her chest. Bernardo was on the other side of the room, pouring a drink. The clink of ice against crystal was the only sound. He wore his suit jacket again, buttoned, as if he had never taken it off. He looked composed, untouched by the storm that had just passed between them. Beatrice stood up, smoothing the dress down. She walked to the kitchen island where she had left her purse. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't ask for his number. She reached for the door handle, leaving without a word. His voice cut through the quiet. Beatrice paused, her hand on the brass knob. She didn't turn around. It was a one-time thing. "That's the deal." "The deal." He chuckled, a low, rough sound. "I don't recall making a deal." She finally turned. He was leaning against the counter, glass in hand, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was handsome in a way that felt dangerous. Sharp jawline, dark eyes, tattoos snaking up his neck. He looked like trouble. "I don't do strings," she said firmly. "I don't do breakfast. I don't do follow-ups." Bernardo took a slow sip of his drink. "You're very specific about what you don't do. What is it you do, Beatrice?" Hearing her name on his lips sent a jolt through her. She hadn't told him. She hadn't told him anything. "How do you know my name?" He set the glass down with a deliberate thud. "I make it my business to know who I invite into my home." Beatrice's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a hookup. This was something else. She could feel the shift in the air. She tightened her grip on her purse strap. "I'm leaving." "Go ahead," he said, gesturing to the door. "But you should know, leaving doesn't mean you're free." Beatrice stared at him, her defiance warring with a sudden cold fear. She turned the handle and stepped into the hallway. She didn't run. She walked with measured steps to the elevator, her back straight. She didn't look back. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing her in the mirrored box. She looked at her reflection. Her lipstick was smeared, her hair messy. She looked like a woman who had just been thoroughly claimed. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, smearing the color further. When she reached the lobby, she didn't hail a cab immediately. She stood on the curb, looking up at the towering building. The windows were dark, reflecting the streetlights. She felt watched. It wasn't a feeling, it was a certainty. She finally flagged down a yellow cab and slid into the back seat. As the car pulled away, She glanced back one last time. A black SUV was parked across the street, engine idling. She told herself it was just a car. She told herself she was imagining the connection. She gave the driver her address in Brooklyn, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window. The city blurred past. She focused on the feeling of the seat beneath her, the hum of the engine, anything to ground herself. She had walked out. She had cut the cord. She was safe. But as the cab turned the corner, she saw the black SUV pull out into traffic behind them, maintaining a steady distance. 3 days passed. 3 days of normalcy. Beatrice threw herself into her work at the graphic design studio in Brooklyn. She sketched logos, met with clients, and drank lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. She tried to ignore the lingering sensation of Bernardo's hands on her skin, the memory of his voice in her ear. Her co-worker, Sarah, noticed the distraction. "You okay? You've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes without moving." Beatrice blinked, refocusing on the digital tablet. "Just tired. Late night." Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice. "You know, if you're in trouble, you can tell me. You've been jumpy." "I'm not in trouble," Beatrice said, perhaps too quickly. "I'm just stressed." Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. The message was simple. "You look tired. You should sleep more." Beatrice's blood ran cold. She looked around the studio. The windows faced the street. She stood up and walked to the glass, peering down at the sidewalk. Pedestrians hurried past. No black SUV. No tattooed men. "Who is it?" Sarah asked, concern etching her features. "Wrong number," Beatrice lied, deleting the message. She sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. She opened a new design file, forcing herself to focus on vectors and color palettes. The day dragged on. By 5 o'clock, the studio was empty except for her. She packed her bag slowly, delaying the inevitable walk to the subway. When she finally stepped outside, the evening air was crisp. She scanned the street. Nothing. She walked 2 blocks to the station, her sneakers silent on the pavement. She descended the stairs, the smell of stale air and ozone filling her nose. She swiped her Metro card and pushed through the turnstile. Just as the train doors were closing, she saw him. A man in a dark suit stood on the platform, watching her. He wasn't Bernardo. He was broader, older. He didn't move. He just watched. Beatrice squeezed through the closing doors just in time. The train lurched forward, plunging her into the tunnel. She stood gripping the pole, her heart racing. She had seen him before. At the club. He had been standing near the bar, watching Bernardo. He was part of his world. She got off at her stop in Williamsburg, her mind racing. She needed to go home, lock the door, and pretend this wasn't happening. She walked the 3 blocks to her apartment building, her keys clutched in her hand. As she approached the entrance, she saw it. Parked directly in front of her building was the black SUV. It wasn't hiding. It was a statement. Beatrice stopped. She looked at the SUV, then at her apartment window on the 3rd floor. She could go inside. She could hide. Or she could face it. She took a deep breath and walked straight to the passenger side of the SUV. She yanked the door open. The driver, the same man from the club, sat inside. He looked at her, his expression neutral. "Tell your boss," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline, "that if he wants to talk to me, he can do it to my face. Stop sending your henchmen to watch me." She slammed the door shut and walked into her building without looking back. She climbed the stairs, her legs shaking. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, leaning her back against it once it was closed. She had drawn a line in the sand. She had challenged the predator. She didn't know if she was brave or stupid. She only knew she was tired of being watched from the shadows. Bernardo didn't wait for an invitation. He didn't call. He didn't send a message. He simply appeared at her door that evening. Beatrice opened the door to find him standing there, dressed in a charcoal suit, his presence filling the doorway. He looked imposing, dangerous, and utterly unapologetic. "You have a lot of nerve," she said, not stepping back. She held her ground in the frame of the door. "And you have a lot of defiance," he countered, his eyes scanning her face. "I like it." Beatrice crossed her arms. "I told your driver to tell you to stop." He delivered the message. Bernardo stepped forward, forcing her to either step back or be pressed against him. She held her ground. "But I don't take orders from my employees. And I certainly don't take them from you." He moved past her, entering her apartment without permission. He looked around, his gaze taking in the small space, the cluttered bookshelf, the half-finished sketches on the table. It felt invasive, like he was reading her diary. "Get out," Beatrice said, closing the door. She didn't want to draw attention from the neighbors. Bernardo turned to face her. "You opened the door. I expected your driver. Or a threat. Not you. I don't send others to do my dirty work." He walked toward her, stopping inches away. The air between them crackled with tension. "You think you're in control because you walked out of my apartment. You think that was the end of it." Beatrice tilted her chin up. "It was for me." Bernardo smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "You're wrong." He reached out, his hand gripping her jaw. His touch was firm, controlling, but not painful. He tilted her head back, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You walked out, but you left a mark. I don't like being left." "I'm not a possession," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Aren't you?" His thumb traced her lower lip. "You walked into my world, Beatrice. You took what you wanted. You used me for your escape. Now, you're part of the equation. You don't get to walk away from the math." Beatrice felt a surge of anger. She pushed against his chest, but he didn't budge. "I didn't use you. It was mutual." "Was it?" He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "You wanted to feel something. Anything. To forget your boring life. I gave you that. Now, you're awake. You can't go back to sleep." Beatrice shivered. He was right. She had been sleepwalking through her life, going through the motions. He had woken her up, violently and completely. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Bernardo pulled back slightly to look her in the eyes. "I want you to stop running. I want you to look at me and see what I am. And I want you to accept that you're mine now." Beatrice stared at him, her mind racing. She should scream. She should call the police. She should be terrified. But the fear was mixed with something else, a dark, thrilling curiosity. She had spent her whole life playing it safe, being the responsible one, the quiet one. This man offered chaos. He offered intensity. He offered a feeling she had never known. "I'm not yours," she said, but the words lacked conviction. Bernardo's hand moved from her jaw to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. "You will be." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a battle of wills, a claiming. Beatrice kissed him back, her fingers digging into his shoulders. She hated him. She wanted him. She was terrified of him. And she was addicted to the feeling. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Beatrice's legs felt weak. Bernardo kept his hand on her neck, anchoring her. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Beatrice looked at him, her defiance warring with her desire. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. The dynamic shifted. It was no longer a simple one-night stand or a stalking game. It was a complex, dangerous dance. Bernardo began to integrate himself into her life with a terrifying efficiency. He didn't ask permission. He simply assumed his place. He started picking her up from work. He would be waiting outside the studio in the black SUV, leaning against the hood, a silent statue. Her co-workers stared. Sarah looked terrified. Beatrice felt a mix of embarrassment and a strange, dark pride. She didn't explain. She would walk out, get into the passenger seat, and the car would pull away. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one evening as they drove through the city. She was looking at the lights of the Brooklyn Bridge. "Doing what?" Bernardo asked, his eyes on the road. "Making me a spectacle. Making everyone know." Bernardo glanced at her. "I'm not hiding you. If I wanted to hide you, you'd be in a safe house in the countryside. I'm showing you off." Beatrice turned to him. "I don't want to be shown off." "Yes, you do." He reached over, his hand resting on her thigh. It was possessive, claiming, "You want to be seen. Really seen. Not the polite, quiet version you show the world. You want the messy, angry, passionate parts of you to be acknowledged. I'm the only one who sees them." Beatrice looked away, unable to deny it. He was right. He saw through her facade. He saw the cracks in her armor and found them beautiful. The isolation was another layer of tension. Her friends stopped calling. They sent worried texts, then silence. Her family, who lived in upstate New York, called less frequently. She was drifting away from the life she knew, anchored only by Bernardo's intense presence. One night, they were at a restaurant in the West Village. It was a small, intimate place. Bernardo had closed it down for them. The waitstaff moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. Beatrice picked at her food, the silence heavy. "My mother called today," she said, breaking the quiet. "She asked if I was okay. She said I sounded different." Bernardo looked up from his plate. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I was fine." Beatrice set her fork down. "I lied." Bernardo leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're not fine. You're terrified. And you're angry. And you're intrigued." Beatrice nodded slowly. "I feel like I'm losing myself. But I also feel more like myself than I ever have." Bernardo reached across the table, taking her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "You're not losing yourself. You're shedding the skin that didn't fit. You're becoming who you were meant to be." Beatrice looked at their joined hands. His hand was large, calloused, covered in tattoos. Hers was smaller, paler, trembling slightly. They didn't fit. And yet, they did. "Who am I supposed to be?" she asked softly. Bernardo squeezed her hand. "You're the woman who walked into a club and held my gaze. You're the woman who told my driver to fuck off. You're the woman who lets me into her apartment and her life. You're strong. You're fierce. You're mine." Beatrice felt a tear slip down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall. She was scared. She was overwhelmed. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Not by her friends, not by her family, but by a dangerous man who wanted to possess her completely. Bernardo stood up, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. He took her face in his hands, wiping the tear with his thumb. "Don't cry," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You don't have to be afraid of me. You don't have to be afraid of what you're feeling." Beatrice looked into his dark eyes. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what I'm becoming." "Then let me show you," he whispered. "Let me guide you." Beatrice nodded, a small, hesitant nod. It wasn't a surrender. It was an agreement. She was stepping into his world, into the darkness, but she was doing it with her eyes open. Bernardo stood, pulling her up with him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against his chest. In the safety of his embrace, surrounded by the quiet restaurant, Beatrice allowed herself to relax. She allowed herself to be held. She allowed herself to belong. The threat didn't arrive with sirens or a dramatic entrance. It came quietly, in the form of a man named Silas, a rival who had been circling Bernardo's territory for months. Silas wasn't interested in a war, he was interested in leverage. He found it in Beatrice. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Beatrice was leaving her design studio, walking to her car parked in the private lot behind the building. The sun was bright, the air warm. She felt normal. She felt safe. That was her first mistake. Two men stepped out from between two parked vans. They didn't look like thugs. They looked like professionals. Beatrice froze, her keys in her hand. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood her ground, her training from Bernardo kicking in. Beatrice Trentini, the taller one said. It wasn't a question. Mr. Silas would like a word. Beatrice didn't flinch. She looked the man in the eye. I don't know Mr. Silas. And I don't have words for him. The man smiled, a cold, empty thing. He thinks you do. He reached for her. Beatrice didn't fight. She didn't struggle. She simply moved with the motion, letting him grip her arm, and in that split second, she drove the heel of her stiletto straight down onto his instep. He howled, his grip loosening. She spun, driving her elbow into the second man's throat. It was messy. It was brutal. It was effective. She didn't run. She stood over the groaning men, her chest heaving. She pulled her phone from her purse, her fingers steady. She didn't call 911. She called Bernardo. Bernardo, she said, her voice calm. I'm at the studio. I need you. He was there in 4 minutes. The black SUV screeched into the lot, tires smoking. Bernardo was out of the car before it stopped moving. He took in the scene in a second. Beatrice standing, the two men on the ground, the blood on the pavement. He walked to her, ignoring the men. He cupped her face, his eyes scanning for injury. Did they hurt you? No, she said. She looked at the men, then back at him. I handled it. But I need you to finish it. Bernardo stared at her, a new kind of respect dawning in his eyes. He wasn't just looking at his wife or his possession. He was looking at a partner. He nodded once, a silent agreement. He turned to the men, his demeanor shifting from concerned husband to cold executioner. Take them, he said to his men, who had arrived behind him. And tell Silas that if he ever touches what's mine again, I will burn his entire world to the ground. He turned back to Beatrice, pulling her close. You're shaking, he murmured. I'm not, she whispered. And she wasn't. She was alive. She was powerful. She was his. The wedding wasn't a traditional ceremony. It was a declaration of war and a vow of loyalty, all in one. They stood in the penthouse, the same one where it began. The windows were open, letting in the sounds of the city that had witnessed their start. Beatrice wore a simple black dress, elegant and severe. Bernardo wore his suit, his tattoos visible at his collar. There was no officiant. No paperwork. Just the two of them, facing each other in the silence. Bernardo took her hands. His were rough, scarred, and steady. Hers were smaller, but just as strong. Beatrice, he said, his voice low. You walked into my world and refused to be a victim. You fought for your place. You stood by me when the shadows came. I don't give my loyalty lightly, but I give it to you completely. He pulled a ring from his pocket. It wasn't a diamond. It was a band of black titanium, etched with a pattern that looked like barbed wire. He slid it onto her finger. I promise to be your shield, he said. I promise to be your sword. I promise that no one will ever touch you again without your permission. Beatrice looked at the ring, then up at him. She reached into her own pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. She took his hand, the one that had killed for her, protected her, held her. Bernardo, she said. I promise to never run. I promise to stand in the dark with you. I promise to be your eyes when you can't see. I promise to be yours. She slid the gold band onto his finger. It looked strange against his tattoos, a symbol of peace amidst a life of violence. He pulled her into a kiss that was fierce, possessive, and full of unspoken promises. It was the sealing of a bond that went beyond love. It was a partnership. A union of two souls who had found their match in the darkest of places. 5 years later. The compound was in the Hudson Valley, a sprawling estate hidden behind trees and high walls. It was a fortress, but inside, it was a home. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the halls, a stark contrast to the silence of the business. Beatrice sat in her office, a converted sunroom overlooking the gardens. She was no longer just the wife of a mafia boss. She was an integral part of the operation. She handled the finances, the legitimate businesses, the money laundering with a precision that made Bernardo's accountants sweat. On the monitor in front of her, a security feed showed the backyard. Bernardo was on his knees, wrestling with their son, Leo, who was 6 now. Leo had his father's dark curls and his mother's stubborn chin. He was laughing, a sound that filled Beatrice with a profound sense of peace. Bernardo looked up, as if feeling her gaze. Even from a distance, their eyes met. He smiled, a real smile, one that didn't reach his eyes often. He stood up, dusting off his knees, and walked toward the house. Beatrice closed her laptop and walked to the kitchen. She was making tea when he entered, the scent of rain and gunpowder clinging to him. "Leo's asleep," he said, coming up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his hands on her swollen belly. Their second child was due in 3 months. "He fought you the whole way," she said, leaning back against him. "He's his mother's son." Bernardo's voice was warm. "He doesn't back down." Beatrice turned in his arms. She looked at him, the tattoos, the scars, the darkness that lived in him. She had once been afraid of it. Now, she understood it. It was part of him. It was part of what kept them safe. "Silas called," she said quietly. "He offered a truce." Bernardo's arms tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him we don't make deals with men who try to hurt families." Beatrice's voice was steel. "I told him to stay in his lane." Bernardo stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You told him that?" "I did." He kissed her hard and fast. "You're dangerous, Beatrice Trentini." "And you're stuck with me," she whispered against his lips. "Forever," he promised. "We're taught to fear the dark. We're told that monsters live there, and that safety is found in the light. But sometimes, the light is just an illusion. Sometimes, the only real safety is found in the heart of the darkness, guarded by the very thing we were taught to fear." Beatrice didn't find a fairy tale. She found a reality. A reality where love isn't always soft, and protection sometimes requires a sharp edge. She learned that true strength isn't about avoiding the shadows, but about having the courage to walk through them with someone who knows the way. It's a reminder that not every love story is a rescue. Some are a partnership. Some are a merger of two souls who understand that the world is not always kind, and that the best defense is a united front. Thank you for spending this time with Beatrice and Bernardo. Their story is a testament to the fact that love can bloom in the most unexpected and dangerous of places. If you enjoyed this dark romance, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me bring more stories like this to you. As you go, I'd love to know, what part of their journey resonated with you the most? Was it the moment she stood up to the threat, or the quiet domesticity they built in the end? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the best protection comes from the most unlikely places.